I still remember the exact moment I became the kind of person I swore I would never be. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, the kind of night where the rain comes down so heavy you can barely hear yourself think. I was standing in our cramped living room, holding a USB drive that contained everything my roommate had been working on for the past 3 years. His life's work, his future, his dream. And I made a decision in that moment that would haunt me for the next decade of my life. I told myself it was survival. I told myself he would never know. I told myself that opportunity was meant to be seized, not waited for. But those were all lies I whispered to myself in the dark corners of my conscience, trying to justify the unjustifiable. What I did to Jake Morrison wasn't just theft. It was the systematic destruction of a friendship, a betrayal of trust so complete that even now, sitting here with shaking hands and a heart full of regret, I struggle to understand how I became that person. My name is Marcus Chen, and this is my confession. Not because I expect forgiveness, not because I think admitting what I did will somehow erase the damage, but because the weight of this secret has been crushing me for 10 years, and I cannot carry it alone anymore. I need you to understand not just what I did, but why I did it, and why the guilt never went away, not for a single day, not for a single hour. It sits in my chest like a stone, cold and heavy, a permanent reminder of the moment I chose my own desperation over everything I claim to believe about loyalty, friendship, and basic human decency. Jake and I met during our first week at Boston University. We were both finance majors, both from working-class families who had scraped and sacrificed to send their sons to a good school. My parents ran a small dry cleaning business in Baltimore. His mother was a nurse who worked double shifts to support him after his father left when Jake was 12. We understood each other in a way that went beyond words. We knew what it meant to have something to prove. We knew the particular kind of hunger that comes from growing up watching your parents break their backs just to give you a chance at something better. Our friendship was immediate and intense. By the end of freshman year, we were inseparable. By sophomore year, we were roommates. By the time we graduated, I genuinely believed that Jake Morrison was the closest thing to a brother I would ever have. We had stayed up countless nights together, studying for exams, drinking cheap beer, talking about our dreams for the future. He wanted to build something. I wanted to make money. At the time, I thought those two ambitions were the same thing. I was wrong. After graduation, Jake and I moved to New York together. We found a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Queens that smelled vaguely of mold and had a radiator that only worked when it felt like it. The rent was barely manageable, but it was ours. We were 22 years old, full of hope and ambition, convinced that the world was waiting for us to conquer it. I took a job at a small investment firm. Nothing glamorous, entry-level analysis, endless spreadsheets, 80-hour weeks for mediocre pay. But it was a foot in the door, and I was hungry enough to endure the grind. Jake took a different path. He had always been the creative one, the one with the big ideas, the one who saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. While I spent my days crunching numbers and kissing up to senior partners, Jake worked part-time at a coffee shop during the day and spent his nights building something. He never told me exactly what it was at first. Just that it was an app, just that it was going to change everything. I nodded along, supportive but skeptical. Everyone in New York had an app idea. Everyone thought they were going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. I figured Jake's project would fizzle out like all the others, and eventually he would join me in the corporate world, trading dreams for paychecks. But Jake was different. Jake was actually brilliant. It took him almost 3 years, but by the time we were 25, Jake had created something remarkable. He called it Pulse Track, and it was a financial wellness platform designed specifically for young professionals drowning in student debt. The app did everything. It analyzed your spending patterns, negotiated with creditors on your behalf, created personalized repayment strategies, and connected users with financial advisors who worked on a sliding scale based on income. But what made it truly special was the algorithm Jake had developed. He had created a predictive model that could identify financial distress before it happened, allowing users to make proactive adjustments rather than reactive ones. It was elegant, it was revolutionary, and it was exactly what millions of struggling young Americans needed. I watched him work on it every single night. I watched him sacrifice relationships, social life, sleep. I watched him pour every ounce of himself into this project, surviving on coffee and determination while the rest of us were out living our lives. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being supportive and started being jealous. Not because I begrudged him his success, not because I wanted him to fail, but because my own life was falling apart, and Jake's impending triumph only highlighted my own inadequacy. The investment firm where I worked went through a brutal round of layoffs when I was 24. I survived the first cut. I did not survive the second. One Friday afternoon, I was called into my manager's office and told that my services were no longer needed. Just like that. 4 years of 80-hour weeks. 4 years of sacrificing everything for a company that did not care whether I lived or died, and I was discarded like yesterday's newspaper. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would find something else quickly. But the job market was brutal, and my experience was too specific and not impressive enough to open doors. Weeks turned into months. My savings dwindled. I started borrowing money from my parents, money I knew they could not afford to spare. I stopped going out. I stopped calling friends. I sat in our apartment and watched Jake work on his app while I spiraled deeper and deeper into despair. And then my mother got sick. It was ovarian cancer, stage 3 by the time they caught it. The treatments were aggressive and expensive, and while insurance covered some of it, there were gaps. Terrible, devastating gaps that no working-class family could possibly fill. My father called me crying one night, asking if I could help, asking if I had anything at all to contribute. And I sat there in silence, paralyzed by shame, unable to tell him that I was barely keeping myself afloat. That was the state I was in when Jake came home one night, practically vibrating with excitement. He had done it. He had finished the app. More importantly, he had secured a meeting with a venture capital firm that had expressed serious interest in funding PulseTrack. The meeting was in 2 weeks. If it went well, Jake was looking at a seed investment of $2 million. His life was about to change forever. I hugged him. I congratulated him. I told him how proud I was, how much he deserved this, how hard he had worked, and I meant every word. But underneath those words, something dark was growing. A voice I did not recognize. A whisper that said things I did not want to hear. Things about fairness. Things about opportunity. Things about what I could do with $2 million. I tried to silence that voice. I really did. For 3 days, I fought against it with everything I had. I reminded myself who I was. I reminded myself what Jake meant to me. I told myself that I was not that kind of person, that I would never be that kind of person. But the voice did not go away. It grew louder. And on the 4th day, I started listening. It began with small justifications. Jake had shown me everything about PulseTrack over the years. I had been there through every stage of development. I had offered feedback, suggestions, encouragement. Was that not a form of contribution? Did that not entitle me to something? And then the justifications grew larger. Jake came from nothing. I came from nothing. But Jake had talent. Jake had ideas. What did I have? Only ambition. Only hunger. Only a mother dying in a hospital bed while I sat here useless and broke. Was I supposed to just accept my fate? Was I supposed to watch my family suffer while opportunity dangled right in front of me? The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon when Jake left to visit a girl he had started seeing. He would be gone until the next morning, he said. Did not even think twice about leaving me alone in the apartment. Why would he? I was his best friend, his brother in everything but blood. He trusted me completely, and I repaid that trust with betrayal. Jake kept everything on a single USB drive. All the code, all the documentation, all the investor presentations. He was paranoid about cloud storage, worried about hackers and data breaches. He liked having something physical, something he could hold in his hand and know was safe. He kept it in his desk drawer, right under a stack of old notebooks. I had seen him put it there 100 times. I knew exactly where to find it. The moment I opened that drawer, something inside me changed. I felt it happen, a door closing, a line being crossed. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that USB drive, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to close the drawer and walk away, to be the person I had always believed myself to be. But I did not listen. I could not listen. All I could hear was my father's voice on the phone, breaking as he asked me for help I could not give. I took the USB drive. I copied everything onto my laptop. And then I put it back exactly where I found it, making sure nothing looked disturbed. Jake would never know. That was what I told myself. Jake would never know, and I would figure out a way to make this right. Somehow, eventually. The next part happened faster than I expected. I had a contact from my days at the investment firm, a guy named Derek Harwood who had left to work at a tech incubator in San Francisco. Derek was always looking for the next big thing, always bragging about his ability to spot winners. I sent him a message that Sunday night, casual and vague, asking if he knew anyone interested in fintech platforms. He responded within an hour, eager and curious. By Monday afternoon, we were on a call. By Tuesday morning, I was on a flight to California with Jake's life work stored on my laptop. I told Jake I had a job interview. He was so happy for me. He hugged me at the door and told me he knew things were going to turn around for me. He said we were both about to make it, both about to prove everyone wrong. I smiled and thanked him and walked out of that apartment with the taste of ash in my mouth. The meetings in San Francisco went better than I could have imagined. Derek connected me with a small investment group that was aggressively looking to expand its fintech portfolio. They loved PulseTrack, they loved the algorithm, they loved the market potential. And because I had spent 3 years watching Jake work on this project, because I knew every detail of its development, I was able to answer their questions with confidence. I sounded like the creator because I had absorbed so much from being in Jake's orbit. I knew the pitch because I had heard Jake practice it 100 times through our thin apartment walls. 3 days later, I had a term sheet. They were offering $1.5 million for a 60% stake in the company. It was less than what the original investors had offered Jake, and the terms were more aggressive, but it was still a fortune. More money than I had ever seen, more money than my parents had earned in their entire lives combined. I signed the papers. I told myself I had no choice. I told myself my mother needed treatment and my father needed relief, and this was the only way. I told myself that Jake would understand someday, that when I was rich and successful, I would find a way to make it up to him. I told myself 1,000 lies, each one more pathetic than the last, and I believed every single one of them because the alternative was accepting that I had become a thief, a betrayer, the worst kind of person. The money came through faster than I expected. Within a month, I had $500,000 in my account as an initial disbursement. I paid off my parents' medical bills. I paid off my own debts. I rented a nice apartment in Manhattan. I bought new clothes. I started living like someone who had made it. And every single day, I waited for the other shoe to drop, for Jake to call screaming, for the police to show up at my door, for someone to expose what I had done. But no one came, no one called. Jake had his meeting with the original investors 2 weeks after I returned from San Francisco, and according to the texts he sent me afterward, it had gone well. They were moving forward with due diligence. Everything was on track. I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach that Jake did not know. He had no idea that his app already had a buyer, that someone else was already marketing his technology under a different name with a different face attached to it. The collision came 6 weeks later. Jake called me on a Wednesday evening, and I knew something was wrong from the first syllable he spoke. His voice was hollow, empty, like someone had reached inside him and scooped out everything that made him human. The investors had pulled out. During their due diligence process, they had discovered that a nearly identical platform was already in development by another company, a company funded by a San Francisco investment group, a company run by someone named Marcus Chen. Jake did not scream. He did not curse. He just asked me one question, and his voice was so quiet I could barely hear it. "Did you do this?" I lied. Of course I lied. What else could I do? I told him it was a coincidence. I told him that the fintech space was crowded and ideas overlapped all the time. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. I lied with fluency and conviction, the words flowing out of me like poison, and Jake believed me because he wanted to believe me, because the alternative was accepting that his best friend, the person he trusted more than anyone in the world, had stolen everything from him. But seeds of doubt had been planted, and over the following weeks, those seeds began to grow. Jake became distant. Our conversations grew shorter, colder. He started asking questions that felt like tests. He would mention details about pulse track and watch my face for reactions. He would bring up San Francisco and study my responses. I felt his suspicion building like pressure in a sealed container, waiting to explode. The explosion came 2 months later. Jake had hired a private investigator. I never found out exactly how he scraped together the money. Maybe he borrowed from family. Maybe he sold something. Maybe he just decided that the truth was worth whatever price he had to pay. The investigator traced the San Francisco company back to me. He found the connection to Derek Harwood. He documented the timeline of my trip, my meetings, my sudden wealth. He built a case that was impossible to deny. Jake confronted me on a Friday night in December. He came to my new apartment, the one I had rented, with his stolen money, and he laid everything out on my kitchen table. Photographs, documents, email transcripts, a complete record of my betrayal, organized with the same meticulous attention to detail that Jake applied to everything he did. I will never forget the look on his face. It was not anger. It was not rage. It was something far worse. It was grief. Pure, unbearable grief. The kind of grief you see when someone loses a child or buries a spouse. He was mourning me. Mourning the person he thought I was. Mourning the friendship he thought we had. I tried to explain. I tried to tell him about my mother, about the medical bills, about the desperation. I tried to make him understand that I had not done this because I wanted to hurt him, that I had done it because I felt like I had no other choice. But even as the words came out of my mouth, I heard how hollow they sounded. There is no explanation for betrayal. There is no justification for destroying someone who loves you. I was a thief and a liar, and all my excuses were just more lies. Jake did not press charges. I still do not fully understand why. Maybe he knew that a legal battle would be long and expensive and uncertain. Maybe he was too broken to fight. Maybe some part of him still cared about me despite everything I had done. Whatever the reason, he simply walked out of my apartment that night without another word. He never spoke to me again. The company I had stolen eventually launched, but it was never the success it should have been. The investors had made compromises during development, cutting corners that Jake would never have allowed. The algorithm was simplified. The user experience was diminished. What could have been revolutionary became merely competent. Within 2 years, larger competitors had entered the market and eaten our lunch. I cashed out with a decent profit, enough to secure my financial future, but nowhere near the fortune that PulseTrack could have generated if Jake had been allowed to build it his way. I used some of that money to start over. I moved to Chicago. I got a job at a different investment firm. I built a career that looked successful from the outside. I dated women I did not love and made friends I did not trust. I constructed an entire life on the foundation of what I had stolen, and every single day, I felt the cracks spreading through that foundation. The guilt started small, just occasional pangs of shame when I thought about Jake. Just moments of discomfort when I saw something that reminded me of our friendship. But over time, it grew. It metastasized. It spread through every corner of my existence until there was nowhere I could go to escape it. I started having nightmares, always the same one. I was back in our old apartment standing in front of Jake's desk drawer, and Jake was watching me from the doorway. In the dream, he never said anything. He just watched, and his eyes held nothing but sorrow. I started drinking. Not a lot at first, just a few glasses of wine to help me sleep. But eventually, a few glasses became a bottle, and a bottle became two. And before I knew it, I was waking up most mornings with a headache and a mouth full of regret. The alcohol helped quiet the voice in my head, the one that kept asking me how I could live with myself. But it never silenced it completely. Nothing could. I tried therapy. I sat in a comfortable office and told a stranger about what I had done, and she asked me questions about my childhood and my parents and my self-esteem, and none of it helped. How could it? Therapy is for people who have problems they did not cause. Therapy is for people who are struggling with circumstances beyond their control. What I had was not a problem. It was a crime, and no amount of talking could undo it. I tried religion. I went to church for the first time since childhood and sat in the back pew and listened to sermons about forgiveness and redemption. I even went to confession, sat in that little wooden booth, and told a priest about the worst thing I had ever done. He gave me penance, 10 Hail Marys and an Our Father, as if a few recited prayers could somehow balance the scales for what I had taken from Jake. Nothing worked. Nothing ever worked. Because the truth was that I did not want to be forgiven. I did not deserve to be forgiven. What I wanted, what I needed, was to somehow make things right. But how do you make things right when the person you wronged will not even look at you? How do you repair a betrayal when the betrayed wants nothing to do with you? I tried to track Jake down over the years. It was harder than I expected. He had deleted all his social media. He had moved away from New York. The few mutual friends we still had refused to tell me where he was. I sent letters to his mother's address, begging for a chance to apologize, but they were always returned unopened. Jake had cut me out of his life completely, and he had done it with the same thoroughness he applied to everything else. So I lived with the guilt. I carried it with me every day, a constant companion, an invisible weight that never got lighter. I got promoted at work. I made more money. I bought a nice condo and a nice car and went on nice vacations to places I never really saw. And through it all, the guilt was there, waiting for me when I woke up, watching me when I went to sleep, reminding me always of who I really was underneath all the success. The strange thing about guilt is how it changes you over time. In the beginning, I was simply ashamed. I knew I had done something terrible, and I felt terrible about it. But as the years passed, the guilt became more complex. It was not just shame anymore. It was fear. Fear that I would never escape what I had done. Fear that I would always be this person. Fear that my entire life would be built on a rotten foundation that could collapse at any moment. And then, gradually, the guilt became something even worse. It became identity. I stopped thinking of myself as someone who had made a terrible mistake. I started thinking of myself as a terrible person. The theft was not an aberration in my life. It was the defining moment. Everything before it was just prelude. Everything after it was just consequence. I was Marcus Chen, the man who stole from his best friend. That was who I was now. That was who I would always be. I became obsessed with Jake, not in a stalking way. I did not seek him out or try to find him, but I thought about him constantly. I wondered what he was doing. I wondered if he was happy. I wondered if he had recovered from what I had done or if I had permanently derailed his life. Every time I saw someone who looked like him on the street, my heart would stop. Every time I heard the name Jake, I would flinch. He had become a ghost, haunting my every waking moment. In my fantasies, I would find him and apologize. I would explain everything. I would tell him about my mother and my desperation and how sorry I was. And he would listen, really listen, and eventually he would forgive me. We would never be friends again, but there would be some kind of closure, some kind of peace. The weight would lift, and I would be able to breathe again. But those were just fantasies. In reality, I knew that Jake would never forgive me. How could he? I had stolen his dreams. I had taken years of his work and profited from it while he got nothing. I had looked him in the eyes and lied again and again until even the lies were not enough to save me. There was no apology that could undo that damage. There was no explanation that could make it acceptable. As the years passed, I started to see the effects of my guilt in every area of my life. My relationships suffered. I dated several women seriously, but I could never let them get too close. How could I? If they knew who I really was, they would leave. So I kept walls up, maintained distance, sabotaged every connection before it could become too real. I told myself I was protecting them. In reality, I was protecting myself. From vulnerability, from honesty, from the inevitable moment when they would see the truth and hate me for it. My friendships followed a similar pattern. I had colleagues who liked me, acquaintances who invited me to parties, but no one I would call a real friend. How could I be a real friend to anyone? I had proven that I was capable of betraying the people closest to me. I had proven that my loyalty meant nothing when it was tested. Every friendship I formed was shadowed by the knowledge that I did not deserve it. My career was the one area where I thrived, but even that success felt hollow. I was good at my job. I was strategic, analytical, ruthless when necessary. But I knew where those qualities had come from. I knew what I had been willing to do to get ahead. Every promotion, every bonus, every accolade was tainted by the original sin that had launched my career. I had built my success on Jake's broken dreams, and no amount of achievement could change that fact. The drinking got worse in my early 30s. I went to rehab twice, got clean, relapsed, got clean again. The pattern was always the same. I would stay sober for a few months, start to feel better about myself, and then something would trigger a memory of Jake, and I would be right back at the bottom of a bottle. The counselors in rehab talked a lot about making amends, about reaching out to the people you had hurt and asking for forgiveness. I nodded along, did the exercises, made the lists. But I knew that Jake would never accept my amends. I knew that some things could not be fixed. And then, last year, everything changed. I was in New York for a conference. It was my first time back in the city since I had moved to Chicago, and the whole trip felt haunted. Every corner reminded me of something. The coffee shop where Jake had worked, the subway station where we used to wait for the train, the street where our old apartment building still stood, looking exactly the same as it had 10 years ago. On my last night in the city, I went to a bar in Midtown to have a drink before my flight the next morning. It was a random choice, just a place I walked past that looked quiet and clean. I ordered a whiskey, settled into a corner booth, and tried to ignore the memories pressing in on me from every direction. That is when I saw him. Jake was sitting at the other end of the bar, nursing a beer and staring at his phone. He looked older, of course. We both did. But it was unmistakably him. The same profile, the same way of hunching his shoulders when he was deep in thought, the same nervous habit of tapping his fingers on the bar. My whole body went cold. For a moment, I could not move, could not think, could not do anything except stare at the man whose life I had destroyed. I considered leaving, just walking out, catching a cab, flying back to Chicago and pretending this had never happened. But something kept me rooted to my seat. Call it fate, call it guilt, call it the universe finally giving me the chance I had been praying for. I walked over to him. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I stopped a few feet away, waiting for him to look up, waiting for the recognition and the anger and the hatred. But when Jake looked at me, there was none of that, just surprise, just a flicker of something that might have been sadness, and then, impossibly, a small nod. "Hey, Marcus," he said. His voice was calm, almost resigned. I did not know what to say. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, rehearsed 1,000 speeches, but now that it was here, Every word I had prepared had vanished from my head. I just stood there, frozen, while Jake watched me with those same sad eyes I remembered from the night he had confronted me in my apartment. "You can sit down," he said, "if you want." I sat. I ordered another whiskey, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. We just sat there, side by side, like two strangers who happened to share a history. It was Jake who finally broke the silence. "I heard about your mom," he said. "She passed a few years ago, right?" "I'm sorry." I stared at him, shocked that he even knew. But of course he knew. The internet makes it almost impossible to completely disappear. He had probably looked me up over the years, just like I had looked him up. We had both been tracking each other from a distance, unable to let go entirely. "Thank you," I managed to say. "She fought hard. Lived another 8 years after the diagnosis." "That's good," Jake said. "I'm glad she got those years." And then we were silent again. But this time, the silence felt different. Less hostile, more like two people gathering their courage. "I want to tell you something," Jake said finally, "and I want you to just listen. Don't interrupt, don't explain. Just listen." I nodded. "What you did to me destroyed my life. For years. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You took everything I had worked for and you stole it and you lied to me about it. And then you lived well on what you stole while I had to start over from nothing. Do you understand how that feels? Do you have any idea what that kind of betrayal does to a person?" I felt tears forming in my eyes. I tried to blink them away, but they came anyway, rolling down my cheeks in a pathetic display of self-pity that I knew I did not deserve. "But here's the thing," Jake continued. "I spent a long time hating you. Years. I would lie awake at night and imagine all the terrible things I wanted to happen to you. I fantasized about you losing everything, about you suffering the way I suffered. I let that hatred consume me. I let it define me. And you know what I realized eventually?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "I realized that my hatred for you was only hurting me. You were out there, living your life, probably not even thinking about me most of the time. And I was here, wasting years of my life on anger and bitterness and revenge fantasies. I was giving you power over me even though you were not even present. I was letting what you did to me continue to damage me long after the actual theft." Jake paused, took a sip of his beer, and then looked directly at me for the first time. "So I decided to let it go. Not for your sake, for mine. I stopped hating you. I stopped thinking about revenge. I started focusing on rebuilding my life instead of dwelling on how it had been destroyed. And what I learned was that I was stronger than I thought. What you took from me was just one idea, one project. But I had more ideas. I had more projects. I had things inside me that you could never steal because they were part of who I was, not something I had created. I started another company, different technology, different market. It took years, and it was harder than Pulse Track because I had to do it while recovering from what you did. But I built it. I built something good, and last year, I sold it. For more money than Pulse Track ever would have made." I stared at him, not believing what I was hearing. Jake was successful. Jake was okay. Jake had not just survived what I did to him, he had thrived in spite of it. "So I don't hate you anymore, Marcus. I don't forgive you either. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, because it wasn't. What you did was wrong. It was a betrayal of everything we had, everything we meant to each other. You broke something that can never be fixed, but I'm not carrying you around anymore. You're not my burden to bear. You're just someone from my past, someone who hurt me, someone I used to know." Jake finished his beer and stood up. He looked at me one more time, and in his expression, I saw something that surprised me. It was pity. Jake Morrison, the man I had stolen from and lied to, was looking at me with pity. "I hope you find peace, Marcus," he said. "I really do. Not for my sake, for yours. Because the thing I've learned about guilt is that it's a choice. You can carry it forever, or you can put it down. You can let it define you, or you can decide to be something else. The choice is yours. It always was. And then he walked out of the bar, and I never saw him again. I sat there for a long time after he left, staring at my empty glass, trying to process what had just happened. Jake had found me. Jake had spoken to me. And instead of the confrontation I had expected, instead of the rage and accusations, he had given me something far more valuable. He had given me perspective. For 10 years, I had been torturing myself with guilt. I had built my entire identity around what I had done, defining myself by my worst moment. I had assumed that Jake was out there somewhere, suffering because of me, his life ruined by my betrayal. And I had used that assumption to justify my own endless self-flagellation. But Jake was fine. Jake was more than fine. He had rebuilt. He had succeeded. He had done everything I never believed he could do without pulse track. And in doing so, he had proven something that I had never been willing to consider, that the damage I had caused was not as permanent as I thought, that people are more resilient than I gave them credit for, that even the worst betrayal can be survived, can be overcome, can be transformed into something stronger. Do not misunderstand me. I am not saying that what I did was acceptable. It was not. It was a betrayal of the highest order, a violation of trust that can never be undone. If I could go back and change it, if I could stand in that apartment again with Jake's USB drive in my hand, I would put it back. I would close the drawer. I would find another way to save my mother, another way to deal with my desperation. But I cannot go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward. All we can do is decide who we want to be now, in this moment, with the knowledge of what we have done. Jake was right. Guilt is a choice. For 10 years, I chose to carry it. I chose to let it define me. I chose to punish myself endlessly for a crime I could never undo. And in doing so, I wasted a decade of my life on suffering that helped no one. Not Jake, not my family, not myself. The money I stole bought my mother 8 more years of life. That is real. That is something. In the twisted calculus of the universe, my betrayal of Jake allowed my mother to see her other grandchildren born, allowed her to celebrate more birthdays, allowed her to live long enough to tell me she loved me one last time before she died. I do not know how to weigh those things against each other. I do not know if there is a moral ledger where the good I did for my mother can ever balance against the harm I caused Jake. But I know that my endless guilt did not help either side of that ledger. It was just suffering for suffering's sake. Since that night in the bar, I have started to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly, incrementally, I have begun to put down the weight I have been carrying. I started by being honest. I told the woman I was dating about what I had done, all of it, every detail. I expected her to leave. I expected her to look at me with disgust and walk out of my life. Instead, she listened. She asked questions. She told me it was the worst thing she had ever heard someone confess to. And then she held my hand and said that people are more than their worst moments, that growth and change are possible, that the fact I had been carrying this guilt for so long was itself a form of punishment, a form of penance. We are still together. I am not going to pretend that our relationship is perfect, or that she looks at me exactly the same way she did before she knew. Something changed between us that night, but something also strengthened. For the first time in my adult life, I am in a relationship where the other person knows who I really am, not the curated version, not the careful facade, the real person underneath, with all his flaws and failures and regrets. I started going to therapy again, but this time with a different goal. Not to seek forgiveness or absolution, not to find some magic formula that would make the guilt disappear, but to learn how to live with what I had done while still moving forward. To understand that I could acknowledge my mistakes without being destroyed by them. To find a way to be a better person now without pretending that I was always a good one. I also started giving back. Anonymously at first because I was still afraid of being exposed, of having my secret spread beyond the people I had chosen to tell. But over time, more openly, I donate to organizations that help people struggling with student debt. I mentor young professionals who are trying to make it in fields where I have experience. I try to be the kind of friend and colleague that I failed to be with Jake. Does that balance the scales? No, of course not. There is no amount of good deeds that can erase what I did. But that is not the point. The point is to be better. The point is to learn from the worst thing you have ever done and use that knowledge to become someone worthy of the second chance you are giving yourself. I still think about Jake every day. I still feel the weight of what I did, but it is different now. Less crushing, less defining. He has moved on with his life. He has built something better than what I stole. And, in his own way, he gave me permission to move on too. Not forgiveness, never forgiveness, but something almost as valuable. He gave me the knowledge that my guilt was not helping anyone, that my endless self-punishment was just another form of selfishness, that the best thing I could do, for him and for myself, was to stop living in the past and start trying to be better in the present. I am still a work in progress. I probably always will be. The person who stole from his best friend is still inside me somewhere, and I have to be vigilant against him every day. But I am not only that person anymore. I am also the person who is trying to make amends, the person who is trying to be honest, the person who is trying to deserve the life he has built, even if it was built on a foundation of betrayal. There is a quote I came across recently that stuck with me. I do not remember who said it, but it goes something like this. We are not defined by the worst thing we have ever done. We are defined by what we do next. I stole from my roommate. I betrayed my best friend. I built my success on someone else's dreams. Those facts will never change. They are part of my history now, permanent and indelible. But they do not have to be all that I am. They do not have to be the end of my story. I get to decide what comes next. I get to choose who I want to become. And I am choosing to become someone better, someone worthy of the guilt I carry, someone who takes the weight of that guilt and transforms it into something useful. Not a prison, but a reminder. Not a punishment, but a motivation. That is my confession. That is the truth of who I am and what I did. I cheated my roommate, and the guilt never went away. But I am learning, slowly, to carry it differently, to let it teach me instead of torturing me, to use it as fuel for growth instead of grounds for self-destruction. I do not know if I will ever fully escape the shadow of what I did. I do not know if there will ever come a day when I can think about Jake without feeling a pang of shame, but I know that I am trying. I know that I am moving forward, and I know that somewhere out there, Jake is living his best life, unencumbered by me and my mistakes. That has to be enough. For now. For always. Because sometimes, the only way to make peace with the past is to accept that you can never fully atone for it. Sometimes, the best you can do is carry the weight with grace. And sometimes, the hardest thing in the world is simply to keep going. I keep going, every day, one foot in front of the other, carrying the guilt, learning from it, trying to be better. It is not redemption, but it is the closest I will ever get. And that, I have finally decided, will have to be enough.